And here we go for, we are at session 6 this afternoon. We're going to talk about Mediterranean biodiversity interactions and governance. It's going to be the third section dedicated to the Mediterranean Sea. And we will have here this afternoon Sofia Zonka, Lena Mertz, and Amy Green. You're all already, and especially you, Sofia. I guess we have to go. As usual, you may want to know who is in your jury. I think it's clear for you. So Steve Como, Eric Rottinger, Aldina Miel, and also Florence Lacrosse from Coral Guardian online. So you will see her. So you will see her after. And in your reviewers, you also have, in addition to Steve, Florence, Eric, and Aldine, and Pajot, who joined this jury. You're already all set. 15 minutes in front of you. Allez, so enjoy the next 15 minutes and more.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the presentation of my Immersion project on biotic interactions between the non-indigenous Caulerpa cylindrata and the native Gongolaria barbata germlings on the island of Sainte Marguerite. I was hosted by the Ecosys Lab and supervised by Aziz Mullah and Luisa Mangialaccio. So to start this presentation, I would first like to share with you a lesson that I learned throughout this experience. And this was to be a neutral observer. So, wait, it's not working. This is me being a neutral observer with my pink wetsuit. What I actually want to say is that when we start an experiment, we always have our initial assumption, hypothesis, but what it is very important to be a good researcher, it is to always adapt to your experiment. So to neutrally observe what's going on and then draw your conclusion without being biased by your own ideas. So this is why I chose this title, Rethinking the Invader. And here is the first species that I included in my study, Gongolaria barbata, which is one of the rarest species of the Cystoceras encellato group. It is a canopy-forming brown algae that is native to the Mediterranean. And thanks to its complex structure that it looks like a tree, it can host a high marine biodiversity, such as ascidians, sponges, small crustaceans, and it brings also many ecosystem services to coastal communities. Unfortunately, it has been recorded that it's on an historical decline due to many anthropogenic pressure, and in particular due to coastal development, because the habitat of this species, it's usually in the intertidal area. So coastal development is one of the major pressures, along with sedimentation, which is one of the factors that are included in my study. And when the forests are weakened, they tend to fragment, leaving empty niches between them. So this is a perfect ground for a non-indigenous species to come into scene, such as Caulerpa cylindrata. It is a Siphonaceous green algae that is original from southwestern Australia, and it was introduced in the Mediterranean around 1985. And we all know that the genus Caulerpa has a great invasive potential. In fact, here in the Côte d'Azur, we could witness a habitat degradation due to Caulerpa taxifolia. But which are these characteristics of Caulerpa that make it such a great invader? Well, first of all, it creates a very dense stolon mat. The stolon are the filaments that connect the different fronts of the algae. And together with its rhizoid, they accumulate sediment, leaving no space for other species to colonize. Moreover, they can rapidly spread in the environment through vegetative fragmentation, which is a very small segment, up to 2 millimeters of the Caulerpa, could recreate a completely new individual. Moreover, it showed also to have a very high adaptability, because it adapted to the seasonality of the Mediterranean Sea by shrinking its biomass during winter and increasing it during the summer. So my initial assumption of this interaction would be that the Caularpa cilindrata would significantly harm the Barbata germlings. And we decided to focus on the early life stages of these algae because it is an indicator for population dynamics, and it is also a very critical life stage for the individual. So my idea was that the Caularpa, by accumulating the sediment around the rhizoid, as you can see here from the pictures, it would smother the germlings, reducing space availability and also light. The study was conducted partly on the field in Sainte Marguerite that we all know, and I also was able to collect some specimens from the island. It is a Natura 2000 site from the Région des Alpes-Maritimes, and I selected this site because there's a very healthy Barbata population that is rare to find in the south of France, and also there's ongoing restoration action that is carried out by the rescue team from the Ecoseas Lab. My initial research questions were, first, what is the quantity of sediment that will actually affect the survival of the germlings? Second, which is the interaction between the two algae that I want to study? And third, does the Barbata show any kind of native resistance in this interaction? My methodology was divided in 3 sections, 1 on the field and 2 with laboratory setting. For the fieldwork, I wanted to have a more ecological context to my study in order to actually see the interaction between the two algae in the wild and not just in the laboratory. In particular, I focused on the Caularpa seasonality and the impact that it might have on the algae richness of the island. The data collected are Caularpa frequency and France height, the algae richness, and the Cystosera species present on the site. I did this sampling 6 sites across the island, doing 4 quadrat replicates at each site and using 25 by 25 centimeters quadrat. The data were collected straight on site, but also photographic material was taken for later analysis using the method that you can see on the slide. For the first experiment, I wanted to test which was the sediment threshold affecting the survival of the germlings. I prepared this condition tile that would mimic the natural substrate of the rock pool. And I would then release the Barbata germlings on top of the tile, then adding different conditions of sediment. So 0 for the control, 10, 20, and 30 grams of sediment. For each condition, I had 4 replicates for a total of 16 tiles. But why did I decide to do the experiment on the sediment first? Well, because I wanted to quantify which was the exact quantity that would cause the mortality without adding the Caularpa. And second, to also validate the use of this sediment in particular for the next experiment, because I found some literature, but the sediment type wasn't explained, so I decided to do this one with the same sediment. For the second one, here I tested the interaction between the two algae, but adding always sublittle dose of sediment, which was 5 grams, because I ratioed it to the size of the tile. I had 3 different densities of germlings on each tile. As you can see here, this was the setup of the experiment. And it's very different from the one before because I decided to create first a substrate of loose sediment, then place the tiles on top of it with the germlings already. And then I added the sediment and the Caularpa on top. Here you can see it maybe simplified better, and this is what a tile with the Caularpa and sediment would look like. To test the survival and mortality of both algae. I had the 3 controls. For the Cystoxera, I had 1 control without Caulerpa, another without sediment and Caulerpa, and then a 3rd control for Caulerpa that had bare tiles, no Cystoxera in the tank, and the sediment. And here we are to the results of the first experiment on the sediment. Here you can see the density of Barbata germlings changing with each sediment condition. And I was quite relieved to see a very significant threshold. It would be interesting to have more gradients between 20 and 30, but I would say that from 20 grams of sediments on, there is an impact on the survival of the germlings, and this aligns with literature from the study of Irving et al. That underlines the fact that the early life stages of Barbata are particularly sensitive to burial pressures. And then here we get the very interesting results. You can see in the graph the Caulerpa cylindrata mortality. I first put all the tanks that were with Cystoxera in one group and the control in the other. And there is a significant difference between the two, meaning that the Caulerpa would die in the tanks that, with the Barbata germlings. Then, to be sure about this result, I went more in depth. And you can see here at the bottom is the control with no germlings. And the top line is the highest density of germline. So not only the Barbata affects the mortality, but also if they're on highest density, they increase the mortality rate of Caulerpa. But I started to understand this mechanism because I tried for the first experiment to let the Caulerpa attach on the substrate, and it would never attach. And my experiment was almost failing. But here I managed at the end to add a control. So 12 out of 12 tile bearing Cystoxera did not let the Caulerpa attach to the substrate. And in the control, 4 out of 6 did attach. And here you can see a little bit, there's the germlings, and the rhizoid of the Caulerpa go inside the hole of the tile to grab the sediment underneath, but does not attach to the tile itself. And then I went to see, of course, the Barbata survival. And it seems that the treatment tank with the Caulerpa had a higher survival. In particular, higher densities of germlings bring to a higher survival. And this occurs to literature because it tends to create a forest, these algae species. So it makes sense that it thrives at high densities, even though the survival might decrease after a few months. Unfortunately, I could not have significant results or like not a strong significance because I had an imbalance in size for each condition. And here we get to the fieldwork result. The Caulerpa showed a very high temporal and spatial variation. In particular, it was interesting to see that site 1 had a very abundant population of Cystoxera, having like quite large individual. And this was because it was the only site in an enclosed rock pool, meaning that this kind of environment, it's the favorite one of the Caulerpa because it's more stable and it can get warmer. But unfortunately, it's also the favorite environment of the Barbata. And here I put it in relationship with the algae richness of the quadrats. They seem to follow a similar trend, meaning when there's low coverage of Caulerpa, there's low diversity richness. When there's high coverage, high richness. So probably there's just favorable environmental conditions for algae growth in those sites. But we have 2 exceptions. Site 1, as I said before, it's a sheltered rock pool, and site 6 was characterized by very sparse rocks, so it didn't allow for an optimal growth of Caulerpa. And this brings us to our final question. Is then Caulerpa cylindrata to be considered invasive on the island of Sainte Marguerite? Well, from my lab results, I could see that it seems that the barbata is releasing some second metabolites that are inhibiting the attachment of the rhizoids on the substrate. But some water analysis testing should be done to confirm this. And also, in the wild, these results could not be so strong because the water is much more, the second metabolite would be more diluted in the water. But still, it makes me think that if we have an empty niche and the barbata is the first one to colonize it, then the caulerpa cannot colonize it afterwards because the germlings are going to inhibit its growth. And then looking more into the seasonality of the caulerpa, I tried to correlate it with the seasonality of the barbata. In fact, the peak growth of Cylindracha arrives at the end of the maturity of the barbata germlings. This could have no effect at all, or could lead to a coexistence of the two species. I would like to redo completely the experiment by testing the other way around, meaning having a substrate with caulerpa already attached on it, as we can see now in the natural environment, and then release the germlings on top. Although this different experiment setup is limited by the fact that to count germlings on a loose sediment, it's impossible. They look the same. So, and it would be nice to see the growth of the algae afterwards, but they don't resist for more than a month in the laboratory. So it would be really difficult. Then I wanted to put this result in a bigger global context because caulerpa is invasive in other parts of the Mediterranean, in particular in the southern part, because of warming water temperatures. So climate warming might actually change this situation and enhance its invasive potential. So to conclude, Gongolare barbata seems to have an inhibitory effect on the attachment of caulerpa, and caulerpa doesn't show any negative impact on the marine environment. Although these results might shift due to warming water temperature, and therefore it's always important to carry out some precautionary monitoring. I would like to thank very, very much all the Forescue team, in particular my supervisors, Aziz and Riza, and Anne-Marine and Edwin that helped me set up the experiment, collect my data, and just like brainstorm for anything. So thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. So we can start the questions. We can start online, maybe with you, Florence.
Yes, of course. Thank you for your presentation, Sophia. So I have a few questions. Maybe I could start by asking you to expand on several of your findings or your results. Could you expand on why you think Gongolaria barbata prohibited caulerpa attachment? And then I'll come to the second expansion.
Why I think he did so is to not allow other algae to grow on top of small germlings that require very high spatial availability and light. So it makes sense with the biology of the algae. Moreover, the Cystizoera group in general is known to have very strong second metabolites. So doing some studies afterwards, I started thinking that it was possible, but to be honest, it has to be taken with a grain of salt, a pinch of salt, because it was on laboratory settings, and I didn't really see a limit between the barbata forest and the caulerpa coverage in the wild. And this is why I think that these metabolites could be diluted in the water and then not have such a strong effect. But it's interesting to see that such small germling can have this great power.
Yeah, thanks for that insight. The second thing I was wondering if you could expand on is why you think the Gongolaria barbata has a higher survival with Qualerpa. That was one of the results that you showed. Do you know why that might be?
I think that it could be linked to the fact that it brings more nutrients into the water. Okay. Because in the other tanks, there was just sediment or just like the tiles with the germlings inside a plastic container. So I was thinking maybe there's like degrading parts of the Caulerpa that could bring more nutrients into the water that then are absorbed by the germlings. And then because the reason why they could have a higher survival with high densities, it's actually been confirmed also by a study done by my supervisor. Although there's an initial good survival at high density, but then it declines because they're out competing at a certain point.
Okay. And regarding the first point, do you know if there's any literature or like studies that found the same result? No. Okay.
No. But it could be good for anti-fouling paint.
Yeah, thanks. Christophe, do I have time for one more question?
I can invite you to give away to Steve, and we'll go around and come back to you if we have time. Thank you, Florence.
Perfect, thanks.
Thank you. Regarding your experiment, do you think that you are maybe missing one key component in your experimental design? You know, if you had to change something, you know, play with different other parameters, which one would you have liked to play with?
I would like to include the hydrodynamics, like more complex hydrodynamics, maybe adding some pumps inside the tank. But then that would also would skew the experiment. So I thought about a completely different setup to mimic what I saw in the rock pool, having like a bigger tank with the branches releasing on the side, and in the middle having the Caulerpa, adding the hydrodynamics to see where the germlings would end up settling, and then let them grow to.
Yep.
Let's see.
Yeah. No, I was also thinking about hydrodynamics. Yeah, and the same with sediment also. Like, you know, when you have like the effect of hydrodynamics with when you have sediment, if it's like a still water or if it's moving a lot, not the same effect.
Also, another thing is that the barbata tends to grow on bare rocks.
Yeah.
And I would like to add some of these rocks, kind of like I did in the first experiment, to then see if this would allow them to grow just in that niche that is different from the one of the Caulerpa.
But the Caulerpa, they attach more to loose sediment.
Yeah, it can attach to anything because we did do different trials to test the attachment of Caulerpa. So we know that it can attach to anything.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. I had the same question about the sediment, so it's good. I got my answer. I have another question, which is, so first one, how was Caulerpa introduced to this species? You said it's in 85, but do you...
Ballast water.
Ballast water, okay.
Yeah.
And then my question was, what is known about the growth speed of those two species? Because I understand your experiment where you look at the seedlings and the competition, but you can have also the adult version of the algae that competes for the space. So if you put the two in the same tank, does one overgrow the other, or do they have the same whatever?
As I could observe that the Caulerpa grows very rapidly. In fact, even in my experiment, it really almost doubled the size when it wasn't with the germlings. But I'm not that sure about the barbata, because I know that the germlings, like it takes them around 2 months to reach like few millimeters of length. But For the adult individuals, because they're perennial, they seem just like to reach a maximum length that is dependent on the environment they live in. And then
I want just to make sure that the Barbata species, it's just growing, so you have one algae, while the Caulerpa can sort of invade with the whole.
yeah, and it's already an adult.
Okay, that's why. Okay. And then you mentioned the secondary metabolites, but does the Cystosera species have toxins that are encoded by the genome that is known rather than metabolites?
No, I haven't read anything about toxins, but on the other side, Caulerpa has caulerpine.
Exactly.
So actually, in my literature review, I thought that Caulerpa would have metabolites or toxins that would inhibit the growth of the germlings.
Okay. It will be interesting to follow up on this.
Yeah.
I think I will hand over and then I come back maybe to another question. Thank you.
Thank you for this presentation. I have some methodological questions. So you have 3 questions. The first one is about the sediment sensitivity. Are you talking about the mechanic the sediment can okay. If you're talking about the mechanics, so in your setup, do you sterilize the sediment and the tile you are using?
I did leave them in water for 2 days. Both of them, I washed them. I didn't sterilize them.
It would have been great if you want to test only the mechanic of this. It's important. You don't have any bias.
I did have some growths on the tiles, actually.
Because microbiota, it's super important for the attachment of many marine organisms. So
I don't have much knowledge on this, but could be that the sterilizing, then using chemicals, it would then have problems with the growth of the germs or no?
No chemical, you can use the high temperature and yeah. Okay. And so then you talk about this invader effect. What is for you an invasive species?
Non-indigenous species that have negative effect on the marine ecosystem.
Okay, and what if the invasion of the Cystosera is not coming from the way it spread, but more about the way it serves as a nutrient or something like that? I mean, is there any knowledge? So why people say that it's invasive? And in which kind of or type of ecosystem they look at? Which level?
The studies that they reported that its invasive effect were done in the south part of Italy, and it was on canopy algae. So there was a healthy macroalgal forest that was fragmented, and Caulerpa filled up this fragmented niche, and the canopy algae wasn't able to recolonize it anymore.
Okay, so it's on a specific species already. Okay.
Yeah. It was done on specific species.
Okay. Thank you. And maybe.
But also, the Caulerpa can modify the chemical attribute of the sediment. They found that different benthic communities, like the macrobenthos, is different. And also, it is much more tolerant than other algae because it can live in brackish water. It can be subject to very high level of nutrients. So overall, it has a higher probability to survive when the situation gets worse in the Mediterranean.
But doesn't mean that it's invasive. Yeah. Okay. And in your experiment, I didn't get, but how many replicates did you have?
Which?
For your experiment, your experimental setup. Yeah.
I had, so it was like 12 tanks. So I had 4 replicates of each density of Cystosera, but then I had less replicates for the controls because I started thinking about this experiment afterwards, and I didn't have any more ties with Barbata.
Okay, thank you.
We can come back to the jury for the questions. Florence, for example, I think you were having a few more questions. I don't know if it's still.
Yeah, a lot of them have been answered, so I'll let Eric
Yeah.
go. I think Eric still had some.
My question was linked to the Caulerpa toxifolia history. Is any of those two species more prone to be eaten by herbivorous fish, or is there something happening here?
The interesting thing is that it was thought that the Caulerpa species in general, because of caulerpine, were not eaten by predators. But there is more recent studies that confirm otherwise. So the herbivores got used to Caulerpa being here because it's such a long period of time that they started grazing on it. And for example, Salpa sarpa could also help the spread of the Caulerpa because they usually bite it and then they spread it around, and through vegetative fragmentation it just grows even more.
Okay, my question behind that was because you suggested that there might be metabolites or toxins in the Cystosera. So if the fish are less eating this one, it might be going towards the same idea that there might be something that is less attractive for the fish. Or for other grazing animals that can eat the seedlings, right? The adult algae.
No, Cystosera is overgrazed, unfortunately, by Salpa sarpa and sea urchins. In this case, on Sainte Marguerite, the rock pool is closed, so not many herbivores can get in. But with the other population, I saw that they were overgrazed, and they tend to graze on the Cystosera before Caulerpa.
Yeah, maybe one more. So the other algae species you told me about that cannot grow back when the Cystosera is coming in the south of Italy, is it an endemic species or is it also an invasive species?
No, it's native. It's just that like there was Cystosera species in that study, but they weren't that specific about it was just that species. So I think there were multiple species that were canopy forming it.
Next question. So from which part of the world the Cystosera is native?
The Mediterranean. But
Okay, so
like it can be found in Greece, in Spain, and yeah. In fact, for rescue is a Mediterranean network.
Okay.
And there is for example, for the maturity of the barbata, I took some data of that project because they're recording the phenology all around the Mediterranean.
So, but when you say that it came here from Balas, and so Cystosera, sorry.
No, but Cystosera, no, it was Caulerpa that came with ballast water.
Okay, sorry, I mixed it. My bad.
Okay, do you have a few questions? Yes, Ron.
Great presentation. I was just curious because you looked at the effect of adding Caulerpa to tanks of Cystosera. What do you think would happen if you did the inverse relationship by adding the native to the invasive? What would you hypothesize?
I do think that the germlings would not be able to survive on the other way around. Like, I would have to test it, but I do still think that Caulerpa has a higher potential of inhibiting their growth. But from the results of my experiment, maybe the Caulerpa would still have a higher mortality because of the germlings released on top. It would be interesting to do the project, but still my educated guess would be that on the other way around, it wouldn't work.
How were your study sites selected?
Walking around, trying to look for this Caulerpa. I picked some sites that had specific Cystosera population, like the site 1. Then for the others, because I started the monitoring in April, the Caulerpa was really small and hard to see. So I selected the ones where I could see enough specimens, and I chose to take 3 sites on the southern coast and 3 on the northern, just to represent better the whole island.
What it is. Last question from anyone? Yes, Andrea?
Yeah, I just had a question. Now that you, in this last conclusion, you mentioned about the warming waters and what would be exactly like your educated guess of like what would happen in a climate change scenario between the relationship of these two?
Well, I could witness the Cystozeira is basically burning due to very high temperatures, mostly because in the rock pools, the water warms up much faster. So the ends of the fronds were burned by the sun. I do not know if it is truly vulnerable, but I know that Kaularpa is much better adapted to warming water and it would overtake. The interesting thing about the Barbata is that during summer, it was covered by another algae species that seemed to almost shade it. So maybe there's also like other algae coming to help.
There was a question from Luna.
Are Colerpa racemosa and Colerpa silvracea different species, different species?
Yeah, because the study before had the Colerpa. It changed the name quite recently. So it was the Colerpa racemosa variant cylindrata, and now it's Colerpa cylindrata. But it's because the morphology can change a lot depending on the depth as well, on the site location. So they were confused.
You want to come closer to the screen in front of you, you just have to conclude a few hi from people. A special person who was available apparently to listen to your presentation is happy. a special message for you when you say that you will redo everything. This is his message. Congratulations, Sophia. Okay, so now we go with Lina. Mediterranean Sea, heat waves in Wales.
Heat waves are intensifying and they're directly affecting human health and well-being. But did you know that these extreme temperature events do not just stop at the coastline? Well, in my internship, I looked at marine heat waves and how they coincide with fin whale habitats. My name is Lina Merz, and I did my immersion project at the CIMA Research Foundation in Italy under the supervision of Francesca Grossi and Paola Tepsi. And I'm here today to present my work on the co-occurrence of marine heat waves and fin whale home ranges in the northwestern Mediterranean Sea. So let me give you some scientific context first. What are marine heat waves? The most commonly used definition nowadays is from 2016, and it identifies a marine heat wave as an anomalously warm event that lasts for at least 5 days, and temperatures must be higher than the 90th percentile of a 30-year historical baseline period. Marine heat waves are an emerging field of research, and there's still a lot unknown about their impacts. But generally, we do know that they're increasing in frequency, in duration, and intensity. And it's interesting to look at them because they can disrupt vertical mixing and thereby nutrient availability and primary production, and therefore they have an impact on the whole food web. And one especially interesting area to look at this is the Mediterranean Sea, since it is a hotspot of climate change, and here sea surface temperatures are increasing at double the rate of the global average. Within the Mediterranean Sea, there is the Pelago Sanctuary. It is an international agreement between France, Monaco, and Italy. And it has the aim to conserve the 8 resident cetacean species that we find here. And they use it as an important feeding ground because the productivity is very high here due to fronds, vertical mixing, and a seasonal phytoplankton bloom. One of these 8 cetacean species are fin whales. They're misty-seeds, and that means they're filter-feeding animals. They feed on krill, which makes them ecologically sensitive because they're directly linked to oceanographic conditions and primary production. And in the Mediterranean Sea, the population is endangered because they face many threats such as collision, pollution, and the impacts of climate change. So what does the literature tell us about the impacts of marine heat waves on cetaceans? Previous studies have shown that during or after strong heat wave events, cetaceans have compressed habitats or relocated habitats, and encounter rates during surveys were reduced. However, it's important to know that there's a big research gap still. There are not a lot of studies, and especially no studies on fin whales. Most of the studies are based on models rather than actual observations. And there's a limited focus on the Mediterranean Sea. And that's why with my work, I try to address this gap by answering 3 different research questions. The first one is, how have marine heat waves evolved in the Northern Pelagos Sanctuary from 2009 to 2024? Secondly, how does fin whale habitat distribution vary among these years? And then the third one, to combine question 1 and 2, is there a spatial relationship between marine heat wave occurrence and fin whale habitat distribution? And if yes, how does this relationship vary across years and seasons? So let's look at the methods. I told you we're within the Pelagos Sanctuary, which you can see in gray, but then I only focus on the northern part of it, which you can see in the dotted square. And the gray lines, they show all the transects that were done between 2009 and 2024. So data was collected on these ferries crossing the Ligurian Sea and connecting the ports from Savona in Italy, 3 ports around Corsica, and Nice here in France. How did I calculate marine heat waves? So I used the Copernicus Marine Service to get a sea surface temperature data set from 1982 to 2025. And my main study period was from 2009 to 2024. So the climatology period were all the years before, from 1982 to 2008. I then used an open source R script called Heatwave R that allowed me to calculate these heat waves. And I considered 4 different metrics, but I'm only focusing on 2 of them in this presentation. The first one is frequency. So how many events happened in one season? And the second one is the duration, which is about the total number of days summed up across all the events that happened in the period. Now let's switch to fin whales. To map their habitats, I first had to calculate the encounter age, which corresponds to the number of sightings per kilometer on IFPRD. And I calculated this for every grid cell of a 5-kilometer grid. Then I did a kernel density estimation, which is a probability density function that allowed me to transform the sightings that were initially just dots to a heat map. And then based on this heat map, I could define habitats, and I distinguish between core habitats, which is the actual core area of fin whales, and it's a 50% kernel density limit, and the home range, which is more of the general distribution of the whales, and it corresponds to the 90% kernel density limit. Finally, I did my spatial analysis, so I have 2 layers. The environmental layer includes marine heatwave data, and here I have summer and winter marine heatwave frequency and duration. And winter is from beginning of January to end of April, so it includes the phytoplankton bloom season. And summer is from beginning of May to end of September. The second layer is the biological layer, so fin whale habitats, and it's represented by the kernel density estimation. And here I used only the summer months, from May to end of September. To combine these 2 layers, I did a bivariate Morens-1 analysis, and this is a metric that accounts for the spatial structure. So in my case, that means that I looked at a cell and the marine heat wave value in this cell and how it was associated with fin whale habitats in the same cell and all the surrounding neighboring cells. So what are the results? Here you can see my sea surface temperature data set from 1982 to 2024. And I calculated all the heat waves. And you can see in blue the duration in days of all heat wave events that happened. And in red, the frequency, so events per year. And you can see both trend lines are increasing at the statistically significant level. So this tells us my study area is in accordance with literature. So heat waves are increasing in frequency and duration. But then I went more into details and looked at the spatial distribution of these heat waves. So here you can see one map per year from 2009 to 2024. And it's about the summer marine heat wave frequency. So in gray, you can see the shore, Corsica here, Italy and France, and in the different shades of blue, the number of heat wave events. And I don't have time to go into details for every single map, but there's one key takeaway message, which is the patterns are spatially very variable. There's not just one hotspot where the heat wave pressure was the highest every year. And I think this is because this area, the Ligurian Sea, has a very complex bathymetry and circulation patterns that change all the time. So that's why hotspots of heat waves change as well. I then compared different seasons. So you can see the same maps again for summer heat wave frequency, and on the other side, winter marine heat wave frequency for the same years. And you can see that in the winter maps, there's a lot of white spaces. And that means in these areas, there were no heat waves at all. And this tells us already that marine heat wave pressure usually is higher in summer than in winter. But there are exceptions, namely the years 2014, 17, 2020, and 2024. In these years, marine heat wave frequency was higher in winter than in summer. And keep this in mind for later. But now, first, we're going to switch to the fin whale encounter rates. This is just to give you a general overview. So it shows you the encounter rate on the y-axis, number of individuals sighted per 100 kilometer on effort, and all the years of my study period. And you can see here as well, the pattern is changing from year to year. But there are two interesting years, 2014 and 2024, because these are the years where the encounter rates dropped the most significantly compared to the previous year. Then I mapped these habitats. So here, again, we have a map for every year. In green, you can see the core habitats, and then in the dotted outline, the home ranges of the fin whales. And the gray lines show all the transects that were done in the specific years. And 2020 and 2021 were during COVID, so they're not representative. And what do we see? Generally, there's a high variability of the home ranges of fin whales. However, there's a general pattern that the western subregion, so from Nice to Corsica, is a more stable habitat for them because it's always represented as a home range or core habitat. Whereas the eastern subregion from Savona to Corsica is more variable. For example, in 2011 or 2016, it's not a core habitat or home range at all. And in other years, such as 2012 or 2023, it is a big core habitat, so it changes. So what can we take away from these first few results? The results are variable from year to year. However, there's a common finding, which is about the impact of winter marine heat waves. And I exemplify this by the year 2014. I told you here, winter marine heat wave frequency was higher during winter than summer. And it was followed by a very drastic drop in the encounter rate. And also the core habitat was compressed, so reduced compared to other years with the same transects. And that was the case for other strong winter years as well. So let's continue with the last results, which are my bivariate Moran Swan analysis. These are the maps of the 5 years with the highest marine heat wave pressure. And the different colors show different associations between marine heat waves and kernel density estimation, so fin whale habitats. But again, I don't have time to go into details for every single year. So I just want to see 2 main messages again. First of all, it's no surprise by now, the results, they depend on the year and they're changing. For example, in 2018, you can see a lot of dark blue cells in the center, and that means here we had fin whale core habitats that overlap spatially with low marine heat wave pressure cells. And they're surrounded by orange cells, which means we had a high marine heat wave pressure and low fin whale habitats. And that could indicate that low heat wave cells were more suitable habitats for fin whales than those with a high heat wave pressure. But in other years, such as 2023, the exact opposite was the case. Here, we have marine fin whale core habitats in the center again, but they're dark red this time. So it means at the same time, we had a high marine heat wave pressure. And I think this really shows us that we cannot just reduce the complexity of the real world to only one driving factor. But it is very context dependent and variable. However, I further analyzed all these maps and I found one common finding, which is about the relevance of marine heat wave duration compared to frequency. Because generally, I saw that fin whale distribution is more negatively linked with marine heat wave duration than with frequency. And this could indicate that one long heat wave is biologically more relevant than several short ones. Okay, so to conclude, what do we see? Marine heat waves are intensifying in the study area, and at the same time, fin whale habitats are changing spatially from year to year. The data set is large, and across this large data set, we found two common patterns. First of all, generally, winter heat waves are often associated with a reduced habitat extent and lower encounter rates in the summer season that followed this winter. And marine heat wave duration seems to be ecologically more relevant than frequency. So what are the future steps that we could take? First of all, we could just do the same analysis at a finer scale and really assess fin whale distribution just before, during, and after a strong event to assess the immediate response of fin whales. And secondly, since fin whales often feed in the water column, it would be interesting not to only look at the sea surface temperature, but also assess marine heat waves in the water column. And finally, what do we do with the knowledge that was created in these months? My supervisor, Francesca, she's going to go to the Ocean Science meeting in Glasgow next year to present it as a poster. And we also plan on publishing a paper next year. And by doing this, we want to contribute to this exchange that is increasing right now, and also talk to other people working on in the same field to see what methodologies they use and how we could change our analysis. And now, finally, I want to thank, first of all, Francesca and Paola for making this possible and supervising my project, and the Maris team for including this internship in the studies, and all the reviewers and people here for listening and taking the time today.
That's for sure.
Okay, thank you for this presentation. So if you compare now your data with what is known from the literature in other ecosystems, so what can you extract from it?
So there is I summarized the main findings of literature here. Again, there are some similar patterns that I found. For example, well, I said there's no literature on fin whales, but other cetaceans. And there's one study on humpback dolphins, and they found a reduced encounter rate, which after strong marine heat wave events, and they found the same, that it was even stronger after winter events. So I think this link between the phytoplankton bloom and the season that follows after, this was found already in other studies. Other studies have shown even that the fertility was reduced, but I didn't assess this. I only looked at the spatial distribution, so I can't say anything about this. And yes, the decreased core habitat, I found this as well. So yeah.
And in terms of conservation, so what will you do with your data now?
It's a good question. I think before we use this data for more conservation efforts, probably we have to see if we can verify all the results. But I thought about this too, and if we can verify, for example, that the Western transect is really a more stable habitat for them, I think it would be interesting to see if it could act as like a refuge during a heat wave as well. And then it would be nice to include real-time monitoring of the heat waves and see if they coincide with phytoplankton blooms, for example. And if yes, we could inform the Pelago sanctuary and maybe boat traffic and see if we can somehow at least reduce all the other pressures that are happening in this area, because the heat wave itself we cannot change for sure. But if we know it's a year that has a high pressure, we could maybe try to reduce other pressures. And that's
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Very, very interesting. I have a few questions also on the sort of biology of the whale. They are often encountered in the southern part of the Mediterranean Sea, or is it only localized here in other different populations, or can they sort of migrate when it's too hot or warm side, or not?
We still don't really know exactly how they use the whole Med Sea as a habitat. We know that the Pelago sanctuary is used as a feeding ground, and they also have sightings during winter. So maybe some of them are more resident, but they travel or migrate within the Med Sea as well. And yes, it's a good question. For example, this year in 2025, we had very low encounter rates of fin whales, and we were always wondering if maybe they were more in the French side, on the French coast, or in other sites. And I guess maybe they could somehow try to escape these high heat wave zones and go in other areas.
Then I also had two questions. One is, for me, most of the whales were sort of in the Ligurian current that moves also based on the season and heat wave in general. So the connected question here is, you have 3 lines, okay, in a very large area, and you're using a passenger boat that makes plenty of noise. So how robust do you think are the data that you're using for your analysis?
That's a good question too. I think this is a whole different research topic again, to understand the impact of boat traffic on cetacean species, because we know there is one, but we can't really quantify it. But I think since we use the same methodology since 2009, we can at least understand the changes that are happening within this time. I don't say that we see all the whales that are in this area, and maybe, yes, we do disturb them as well, but if there's a change happening in the data set, we know that there's a change happening in the environment as well.
Fair enough. The subsequent question is, do you think that you can use data from non-profit NGOs, sailing boats that also sort of sample the encounters to add this to your data in the future?
I think that would be interesting. So what we do with Chima is we were on the ferries, but we also have they have a research vessel. So we did surveys on both. And they also use data from local whale watching companies. So they already have different data sets.
Thank you.
Thank you. I was wondering, you mentioned that it would be good to, and I agree, to look at marine heat wave at depth.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have an idea on how to do this?
I mean, yes, it's harder to get the data itself. I think it would be more based on models, and then you would use some in situ data to verify the models. For example, on the research vessel, we have a CTD as well, so we did measure temperatures at depth as well. But yes, it's hard to get the full-time picture. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are some time series that could be used. Like there's the DFAMED station that's between Corsica and Nice. It's sort of right in the middle, and there are like monthly CTD casts, and there's also the Argo programs. I mean, there are a bunch of Argo buoys that pass in the Ligurian Sea. So it's not ideal. It's always only one point, but that could be used. Yeah. And so if we come back to the marine heat wave, do you think, no, let's go back, like the way that marine heat wave are calculated, there are a lot of questions on that and a lot of discussion, because, for example, in winter, what we call a marine heat wave in winter is not at all the same as a summer heat wave. You know, in winter, you can have 13.2 degrees for 1 week instead of 13 degrees, and that would be a heat wave.
Mm-hmm.
So did you take that into account in your study, you know, looking more at the temperature delta rather than just the strictly marine heat wave definition?
I mean, not for my final results, because I just used this calculation that I mentioned in the beginning, the definition. So it's the same for both seasons. However, I also looked at not only, sorry, I told you I looked at duration and frequency, but then I also looked at the intensity of heat waves. So just to get an understanding of how much above the climatology, the heat waves were.
Yeah, but even for that, you have to be careful because intensity is based on percentage above the historical data. But let's say I go extreme, but like if you are in the Arctic, if you have instead of 0 degree in winter, you have 0.01 degrees, but it's the first time that this happened, you will be as a very intense heat wave potentially, even if the change is actually very tiny. So I mean, just a small remark.
Yeah, it's true. But here the intensity is in degrees above the climatology.
Yeah.
So it's not a percentage.
But you have to be careful with the R package, the 3 different intensities.
Okay.
I know the creator of the package.
Okay.
So yeah, no, but that was very that's very cool. I was just wondering, like, just pure biology, like, how much distance do they parkour in one day? Those whales? Do we know, like, the distance that they?
How far
Do they stay in the same area, or do they travel a lot in one day? What's the distance?
the whales?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the whales. Yeah.
I don't know how far they go in one day. I know they can travel far distances, but knowing I don't know. I'm sorry. But yeah, I mean, that's also a good point because in my analysis, I looked at the heat at the fin. We recorded all the fin whales that we saw, so we don't really know if they stayed there for a while or if they were just traveling or feeding. So I didn't include the behavior of the whales in my analysis.
Are you searching for a new question, Steve? Or?
No. Wait for a long time. Enough time,
It's your turn.
Yeah, thanks for your presentation. I'll just ask a few questions regarding the origin of the satellite data and the kind of analysis as well that you conducted with that. So I'm wondering if you can explain your choice of not doing a full 30-year baseline as you usually need for the marine heat wave analysis. Why didn't you? Yeah, I'm curious as to why you didn't start your analysis later to have a full 30-year, or why you didn't do a shifting baseline potentially.
Those are two good questions. Well, the first one, I read that the advantage of the definition that I used is that you can adapt it to the data set that you have. So since we already have this data set from 2009 to 2024, I thought it would be really interesting to include all the years and then just reduce the climatology period to for a couple of years, since the literature said that this would be acceptable. And then the shifting climatology, I thought about it, but I came across a paper that did it just halfway through my analysis. So I thought it would be something for a future analysis, because it's true, sea surface temperature is increasing. So it gets more and more easy to reach the threshold. So I think in the end, I decided not to redo my analysis because I think the global patterns wouldn't change that much. But it would be interesting to do it in a future analysis to see if that's actually true.
Okay, thanks. And if I understood correctly, you used level 4 satellite data, yeah? Is there a justification behind that, why you chose level 4 as opposed to other levels of satellite data?
I mean, it's good to have the gap-free data set, and it is the one that allowed me, it included the longest time period. So in the end, that was the decision, like the criteria for the decision. It's more about the timing and yeah.
Yeah, did you come across any potential limitations to using an extrapolated data set?
I mean, that's a good question. I guess it's the limitations that we have in general for models, that it's not just pure observations, so we're never 100% sure. But I don't know, yeah. Maybe the results would be even more reliable and stronger if we have only observations, but then it's also more limited. So it's always a bit of a trade-off.
Yeah, no, I think you guys made the right decision to take a longer data set, but it always comes with limitations. Yeah. Thanks. Do I have time for one more question, Christophe?
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. You mentioned at the end that part of the variation in the results could be due to the fact that there are other environmental drivers impacting whale distribution. Which ones come to mind when you were coming to that conclusion?
You mean the conclusion that we had in just the questions now, or from my presentation?
Oh, no, from your presentation, when you said there might be other factors that need to be taken into consideration. Sorry, I don't know if it was that exact conclusion, but more like verbally, you said that there might be other factors to take into consideration. Are there any that you would look at in particular in future studies, or that you think should be considered?
I guess in general, we could always add more parameters, for example, anthropogenic pressures as well, and see how was boat traffic during the sightings and maybe fishing activities, I don't know. And so include this as well. It will make the study for sure more complicated as well, but more comprehensive. And then within my topic, I think we could just look at it from a different angle, or maybe not only look at sea surface temperature data, but also directly include phytoplankton satellite observations as well, to have a bit of a closer link. I mean, ideally, we would include zooplankton data as well, but unfortunately, that's not available. So, yeah, maybe these.
Thank you.
Do you have more questions? Site. Okay. Let's open the floor for some questions. You guys. It's Corina. And then, Corina, maybe first.
Correct. So very interesting, Luna. You mentioned the behavior that you didn't take into consideration. I didn't quite get because it wasn't available through the data from the whale watching companies or NGOs, or because it was out of scope.
So for my data, I only use the data from the ferries, not the whale watching companies and not the research vessel. And when we do the field work, we always write down the behavior as well. So we write down everything that we see. But in my the scope of this analysis was really just to look at the spatial overlap and the spatial aggregation, and not include the behavior. I think that would have that would be another topic. Yeah.
I think as the next step, it would be interesting working with NGOs that have specific species ID or who use tracking to know how they migrate, how far, and how they use the Med-Sea for more, if thinking about conservation.
I think that would be interesting. Yeah, I mean, it would be another data set and probably maybe another study area extent as well. But it would be interesting to understand how long do fin whales stay somewhere, and are they actually feeding? Because in this analysis, in the end, it's all about the prey availability. So I think, yes, it would be interesting to include this as well and understand this a bit better, at least to draw conclusions as well, even for this study.
Yeah, like to know what relevance these findings have. Cool. Thank you.
Luna and Valerie.
On the series, when you were collecting data, how did you actually collect data? Like, was visual and so?
Yes, so we had two marine mammal observers on each side of the ferry, and then a third person writing everything down. And we used binoculars, and on each side, one person would look at 120 degrees of the sea. And then you observe if you see the whales at what distance, how many behavior, boat traffic.
Is it easy or is it difficult?
It needs some training, and to recognize the species, it's good to do it for a while so you get used to it. But yeah, and then it depends how fast the boat goes as well. Makes it easier.
But I have a broad question. I'm curious as an external observer as well. You were having two main lines from Nice to Corsica and from Italy to Corsica. Are we sure that the same boats, same velocity of the boat, the same people?
So the velocity changes, and it's true that this might impact also the availability or the opportunities to spot.
Going faster between Italy?
They go faster or slower depending on weather conditions, and also on maybe regulations that could have changed within this time. and maybe the mood of the captain. They even changed within the season at the different boats. So it's.
But is it something you consider in your effort per kilometer or something?
I don't know if in the data processing it might be included, but for sure there's an observer effect, because if we go faster, of course, it's harder to spot all the animals. And this, in the end, I did not include. Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. Like we can see that you put a lot of effort in the analysis for all those different maps, and probably would have not understood. I was wondering, because you also talked about the collision risk. Do the ferry operators do anything in those regards, or is it just hoping that the whales don't get too close? Or
I mean, generally, people are working on outreach activities and raising awareness also for the ferry companies, and I think you can see a change. But then it really depends on the crew. Sometimes they were really interested in what we're doing. They asked questions. They helped us even spotting the animals. And when they saw something, they were like, "You have to do something." And then some others were not that much, not equally interested. So I think yes. Also, in the end, it depends how far the animals are, if they can even do something or not. If they're far enough, they can try to slow down a bit or maybe adapt the route a little bit. But if they're too close already, sometimes it can be too late.
did you experience a collision? Or
not for whales, but turtles and also sunfish, mola mola. I guess some of them, it's very likely that they can collision. Yeah.
So I have a follow-up question on that. I'm curious. But were you also people on board also trying to notice other patterns, like for example microplastics or presence of potentially visual fronts you could see?
Mm-hmm. So this project is part of a European project, the Life Contact Pneumatics project, and marine litter, for example, was a part of this project as well. So we also observed all the litter that we saw and.
Well, yeah, marine litter and whatever could float, not for the sake of mapping marine litter by itself, but because it could follow currents and materialize for fronts or buoyings or.
To understand the oceanographic.
Exactly. Yes.
We didn't do
it's
it
been
for.
done in oceanographic cruises.
Mm-hmm.
It's done a lot because as you're here trying to look at something, you can also report the presence of fronts, and knowing that the ship pass through the same course back and forth, you can also follow something which is invisible, the masses of water. Right?
It's really interesting. Yeah, I didn't think about this when we did the surveys, and I don't think they do it, but it's a good input.
The last question of curiosity? Not immediately. Ale.
I was curious, so it sounds like the ferry tracks, you couldn't change which way you went, but you said you did other surveys on different boats as well. When you did those surveys, were you going to find the whales, and did that impact, you think, some of the data?
I mean, yeah, it's a different data set that is different used for other analysis. And yes, there we could actually change, we could choose where we want to go. If we had a sighting, we could choose if we wanted to approach the animals or not. With some distances, of course. So yes, it's not the fixed line transect data set. So it's used for other types of analysis.
Great. Please just Andrea. We're great for time.
In order to complement your study, would you maybe I don't know if there are studies of these, but the habitat use of the whales there, or I don't know if they're studying these, but would you complement these, or what other type of studies or things would you do in order to complement your study?
Yeah, I think that's a bit what we talked about before, to not only include the sighting, yes or no, but also what are they doing, how are they behaving, are they feeding or are they traveling? And since we already collect the data as much as we can, I think it could be interesting to add it as well. And
get data to analyze them, or you would have to do other studies?
No, it's in this data set as well. So for every sighting, we write down everything that we see. I mean, sometimes for the sighting itself, it's easier to record than all the specific details, but whatever we could see and observed, we will write it down.
Thank you. Just before we finish, you have a message from someone. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And Sophia, where are you, Sophia?
It'd be nice to know.
You also had a
Yeah.
message.
My mom.
Amy, here we go. Changing topics? Yes, with Amy. Still in the med. What's yours?
Okay. Think about the expulsion of the tubule in a nidicus when you touch a nidarian. I could just as easily say, think about getting stung by a jellyfish. The words that we use to communicate science matter. And this is where environmental communication comes in, to bridge the gap between scientific expertise and public awareness. So I want to share with you the work that I did for my Immersion project on how communication can help to better understand and strengthen high marine protection in the Mediterranean. My name's Amy Green, and I worked with Together for the Med and Blue Seeds for my Immersion project, supervised by Margot Jana. So let's begin by understanding what high marine protection is. A marine protected area is an area-based management strategy to reduce destructive activities in the marine environment. And it's been shown to be the most effective management strategy to preserve biodiversity, but it also preserves local livelihoods and community economics. And it's really important that we're able to share these benefits with communities, because it's been shown that when stakeholders are communicated with, they have a better appreciation for these areas, and it can lead to higher satisfaction, especially with fishers. And so I chose to, or my focus will be in the Mediterranean, which we've learned is a hotspot of biodiversity, but it's severely underprotected. So the international conservation goals right now call for 30% of protection by 2030, but the Mediterranean is only at 8.8%, with only 0.04% of that highly protected. And so this led me to my research question of how can communication help to understand and strengthen this high marine protection, which is divided into 3 sub-research questions. The first is to understand if there's a difference between local stakeholder perceptions of high protection across the Mediterranean. The second will observe how viewers see this high protection, and if there's a best method to convey these messages to viewers. And then the third part will compare these two groups, the opinions of local stakeholders and the opinions of viewers. And so in order to do this, I worked with Together for the Med, which is an organization based in Bordeaux, an organization of 50 partners working on marine protection, from NGOs to research organizations to international communities. And so what we did is we collected video interviews from 7 countries around the Mediterranean with the goal of creating an 8-minute video on the socioeconomic benefits of marine protection. And we also created 3-minute short videos for each country. We also created a brochure that was available printed and online of Together for the Med activities. And we hosted a side event at the United Nations Oceans Conference, where we screened the 8-minute video that we created. And we had 2 panels, one of NGOs from 4 countries around the Mediterranean and one of funders working in the Mediterranean. And then finally, this fall, I sent out a survey to viewers of these materials, so people who came to the side event or people who saw these materials, to see what they thought. And we had 20 responses to this. And so before we dive in, I just want to clarify a few definitions before we that I'm going to be referring to in the study scope. So a high marine protection, or I might say HPA, that's referring to a highly protected area. These are marine areas under strict protection in IUCN categories 1A, 1B, and 2. A viewer is someone who responded to our survey. So someone who viewed our materials. A local stakeholder is one of the people that we interviewed for this project. And then this is divided into 2 categories. We have professional fishers who were interviewed and others who were interviewed from MPAs, tourism operators, researchers, or NGOs. And so let's see what we found out. So we're going to talk about what local stakeholders said around the Mediterranean. So here we have a word cloud of what different video interviewees said. On the left, we have all of the interviews, and then on the right, we have it split into fishers and others. And we do see, first off, that we have some of the same words in all three clouds of fish, marine, protected area, and this may have to do with the specific questions that we asked. But we also see some slight differences with some words spoken only by one group or another. And so these can be found with reserve, biodiversity, and conservation only being referred to by the others, whereas fishers refer to professional, pollution, and children. So we can see some differences in maybe the others are referring more to the organizational or conservation aspects, while fishers may be referring to their generational professions and how their children will be able to pursue this in the future. So even though they're small, we do see some slight language differences between fishers and non-fishers. And this can be important when we're talking about communication, because if we're able to understand and incorporate these vocabulary differences into communication materials, maybe this can be a way to increase acceptance of highly protected areas in the Med. And we also found that it can be interesting to develop these specific to locations in order to use the vocabulary spoken by the people in these places. Okay, let's see what viewers had to say. So that was about stakeholders. This is about the people who took our survey. So just as a reminder, these are the materials that we created. We had the brochure and we had the side event. And out of our viewers, the largest proportion live or work in France. So 35% of event attendees and 30% of survey respondents, which is important to note because France is one of the forerunners in marine protection. So it's really around the globe. And so it's really part of the conversation already in France. Additionally, we found that over 80% of our survey respondents are already working in marine conservation. So this can be a bias that we need to take into account when we analyze these results. Let's take a look at how often these were viewed. So this is a graph showing the video views from YouTube of our long video on the left and the short videos. And what stands out to me first is that for the long video, we had a lot more views than the other videos. And so this is interesting that we also released this video with a press release and with a lot of information with emails to partners and non-partners from Together for the Med. Additionally, our top viewing country, Spain, held a viewing event in September to show this video. We also found that the short video from Turkey had the next highest view with almost 500. Very different than the other short videos, but it's interesting to note that they held they paid for Facebook advertisements for their video. So what we see here is that promotion of this content actually has a big impact on the reach of what we do. We also asked viewers what type of materials they preferred in order to see what could be improved. So we found that the preferred communication method for viewers. So on the left, we have that the videos you can see and LinkedIn were some of the more reference preferred communication methods. Oh, whoa. Sneaky. But we really also saw that all of our communication methods were preferred by at least some viewers. So we can't really make an assumption that there was a media format that was preferred by all or any viewers. We also asked them why they preferred this method. So on the right, we can see their preferred method, and on the right, why they preferred it. And so we see that people who preferred the videos and LinkedIn tended to say that it was easy to understand and engaging, whereas people who came to the side event and viewed the videos tended to find that it was they valued it because of its authenticity and local community focus. So this can be interesting to note some of the reasons why people are watching. But now that we know this, we also wanted to know how people retained the information we were trying to transmit. So we asked them how they understand the differences between high protection and just regular marine protection, both ecologically and socioeconomically. And so on the top, we can see that all viewers agree that high marine protection provides more ecological benefits than regular marine protected areas. But we do see some more variation in socioeconomic benefits, with some viewers strongly disagreeing that high marine protection provides more socioeconomic benefits than marine protected areas, which is interesting because the focus of our videos was really to show these stakeholders who are gaining socioeconomic benefits and communities who are benefiting from these high marine protected areas. So maybe our content wasn't really sharing the message we were trying to transmit. Additionally, we found a little bit of difference in demographics of viewers. So in terms of community interests, younger respondents tended to believe that communities are well served
by high marine protection more than older respondents, which was interesting. So what did this tell us? We found that there was really no strong preference for any communication material, but we found this discrepancy between the belief in benefits of ecological and socioeconomic benefits of high marine protection. So maybe what we need is more communication materials on the socioeconomic benefits of high marine protection. Additionally, we found that content promotion had a big impact on the reach of this. So maybe what we need to do instead of making more communication materials is just put more effort into spreading this widely. And this is also supported by literature saying that communication campaigns can have a big impact on viewer engagement when promoted on social media. And we also learned that Go ahead. We also learned that viewers really value authenticity and hearing local voices. So we should continue to include these local stakeholder voices when we're creating communication material. Okay, we made it to part 3. So this is going to be comparing viewer perceptions with what local stakeholders said. And so what we have here is the perceived challenges of highly protected areas between the local stakeholders, so in their responses to interview questions when we have these video interviews, and the survey respondents. And we see both similarities and differences here. So we see that both groups really found that stakeholder engagement, conflict resolution between stakeholders, regulatory support, and capacity building for marine managers, really, they're a challenge faced by HPAs agreed on by both groups. But we do see 3 key differences. And so we see that only survey respondents or viewers mentioned geopolitical tensions, you can see on the bottom, where stakeholders didn't. We also see that the stakeholders were much more likely to mention marine and coastal biodiversity and knowledge about this when they were talking about the challenges faced by HPA. So mentioning things like fish stocks, biodiversity, spillover effects, these kind of things. We also interestingly found that survey respondents, over 80% of them mentioned funding needs as one of the highest challenges faced, but was not mentioned once by local stakeholders. And this is interesting because the material analyzed in this study is actually exactly the material that was viewed by the viewers. So we know that it was not mentioned at all in the video material we provided, but local stakeholders or viewers still found this as one of the biggest challenges faced by HPAs. So we can conclude from this is that viewers are likely retaining some of their preconceived notions of what HPAs need rather than collecting it from our communication material. It also may have to do with the format because one study proposes that immersive audiovisual material can have a high emotional impact on viewers, but less factual retention of what we're trying to share. So we found somewhat of a knowledge gap, even though we don't know exactly what caused it. We think that knowing this gap can help us at least focus protection planning on understanding where these misconceptions or miscommunications might happen, so we can create communication materials to address the challenges perceived by local stakeholders. There are also some limitations in this study. We had some biases. So the survey respondents, as we know, a lot of them already work in marine conservation, and the local stakeholders also are at least engaged in this topic because they were involved in this project. We also had a limited number of interviews. So some countries only had 1 interviewee, and then some of them were only fishers or only others from a specific country. So we weren't able to make any geographical assessments or any strong geographical assessments. We also weren't able to collect a baseline measure of viewer knowledge. So we weren't able to concretely see what they've learned from our materials during this study. And finally, we did have a long length of time between when the material was released in June or July and when we collected the survey in October. So it may have had an effect on the retention of the information by the viewers. And so it would be interesting to take this study maybe as a baseline of what viewers know already and try promoting it a little bit further. We learned that this can have a big impact, or holding viewing events to see how this can impact viewer knowledge. It would also be interesting to go to communities and tailor the communication techniques based on the local context. Maybe that means more pamphlets or more social media, depending on where we're looking, or on the age of the audience. And so to conclude, what did we learn from this? Where is this baseline going to be starting from? we know that we need improved targeted protection in the Mediterranean. And so we've learned that we need, from part one, to develop communication at the local scale to include location-specific vocabulary. We've also learned that it's really helpful when we promote this content and use authentic local stakeholder voices. And it's also important to acknowledge any gaps in knowledge between the viewers and between the stakeholders. And so with this improved protection using these communication techniques, we can help to try to meet these conservation goals in the Mediterranean and not only enhance ecological health, but promote local sustainable livelihoods for communities across the Mediterranean. And so with that, I just want to thank Margot, my supervisor, for all of her support through this, and the Mares program and the Blue Seeds team for welcoming me so much, and to all of you for listening. Thank you.
Let's go to Eric, and after that, Florence.
Thank you. A very interesting presentation. I had a question on the conclusion that you had on the fact that there's no tendency of preferring one way of communication versus the other, and you addressed it a little bit in your future perspectives. You may have the results. This, what you showed, is overall, but not split on gender, on age, or something. So you may have an information already if some prefer the video or some more link it in or something. So how do you connect what you have already with your future work?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. We didn't analyze that. I didn't analyze how the demographics changed in preferred method, but that would be really interesting to look at, because I think, at least from my past knowledge, I know that younger viewers tend to be more engaged in social media. So maybe LinkedIn or Facebook would have been their preferred method. Yeah.
Okay. The other question is, in your stakeholders, you talked about fishermen and others. In the others, did you have any decision makers, those who can really take the decision at the end, how to define a protected area?
That's a really good question. No, we didn't. We only had MPA managers, I would say, is the most representative of decision makers, because they may be able to change things within their MPA. For instance, we had the MPA manager from Italy, and then a fisher who works in that area as the two interviewees from Italy. So no, but that would be an interesting assessment to do.
Especially with the idea that you want to try to use that in order to get more highly protected areas. So it might be part. And then I think it's interesting to see that some of the non-stakeholders mentioned the geopolitical tensions as something that is a limiting aspect or something. Is that in one specific country, or is that answer provided by different countries?
It was only one respondent who said that, so I can't really make any.
Okay.
So yeah, but it was just, yeah, I think it was from Tunisia, the person who said that. So.
Okay. Any more details on this? Why he or she thinks that this might be hampering the development?
No, we didn't have any kind of open answer. This was actually a fill-in, so they were able to select options, and then they had other, and so someone added geopolitical tensions.
Okay.
Thanks.
So Florence, let's go to you, and then we'll go to Steve after.
Yes, thanks for your presentation, Amy. I have a few questions, maybe about the methods you employed. I'm wondering how you went about analyzing the interviews. Sorry.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, so what I did is we had 11 interviews. I don't think I said that. We had 11 interviews, 5 fishers and 6 others. And so what I did is I went through all of the text of all of the interviews that we had, translated into English, because all of it was done in the native languages of these countries. And I took out the pieces of the interviews mentioning similar topics. And so that's how I categorized them. And I actually have, here we have the different types of topics that were mentioned by each stakeholder. And then I categorized them into different groups based on what they were saying. So maybe someone didn't say exactly no take zones, but someone said no fishing zones. So I categorized that in the same way. But basically I went word by word through all of the interviews and put them into categories, and then was able to analyze based on this.
Okay, and then if I understood correctly, you then did statistical analyses on that data that you had.
Yeah, basically the amount of times it was mentioned by different interviewees.
Okay, cool, thanks. And then, yeah, my other question was regarding so if I understood correctly, the surveys that you sent out were both to viewers of the videos and attendees of the UNOC event, is that right?
Yes, exactly.
So in that case, is there not a potential bias in which format they preferred because you didn't strictly contact the LinkedIn people or the viewers of the brochure?
Yes, though people, I think, so the brochure was actually given out, printed at the UNOC event, and we showed the video at the UNOC event. So usually people who went to the event were able to see all of the content. But it also is limiting in that people who were not able to attend UNOC weren't able to see the event. And so maybe that had an impact on, we saw that there were less people preferring the side event. And maybe that has an impact on the fact that LinkedIn and the videos were much more accessible because they were on YouTube and promoted. So that might have had an impact on why this was preferred more often. But that, I think that helps lead to the conclusion that we can't really say that one media format was preferred.
Okay. And did you have a personal preference between them, one that you found more effective?
I think maybe because I was also involved in the video creation, but I found the side event the most impactful for me because I think being in the room with the people sharing their experiences from their marine protected areas, I think that was really powerful for me to just be together and having this discussion between ourselves, between them.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I guess one of the main difficulties for you is to reach out to people. I mean, you don't have many responses, right? So, so what's how to deal with that? Like, what do you propose to increase the number of viewers, the number of interviews? Like, yeah.
Yeah, I think taking advantage of events like UNOC, where we can have maybe viewing events to show this material, or maybe partnering with people around the Mediterranean. I think holding a viewing event is a really interesting way to maybe incentivize going. You can have like coffee and treats, and people have a reason to go see this kind of material. Or I think social media, we really found that having ads made a difference, which doesn't feel like an incentive, but it may be a way to spread this material further.
Okay. And then do you see some kind of relationship? I know you don't have much data, but on like the countries that have more MPAs, that's already starting to be more in place, like you see more interest there, it's a kind of like snowball effect, or like it's
I think one of actually the most interesting things I found doing this video project was that everyone was kind of saying the same thing. We were getting respondents from Tunisia and from Cyprus saying the same challenges that they were having with pollution, with illegal fishing, and then highlighting the same solutions. Like some of them are creating this just in their community, like the MPA in Tunisia that we talked to. It's actually just fishers who have decided to stop fishing in this area because they know that the cuttlefish will only replenish if they stop fishing. So they've agreed to create seasons, whereas in France, it can be a strict marine protection area based on the government. But it was interesting to see that the challenges faced seemed similar to me across the board to the fishers that we were talking to, or that we heard from.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ami, for this wonderful talk. I love your topic. You did a really wonderful job. I have a challenging question remark. So what's new in everything you work on now? Because I'm sure you know a lot from the field, because there is a lot of work also done on that. So what's new in your study, or how you want to make the difference between what has been done?
Yeah, new for me was the fact that the advertisement had such an impact. I think the Turkey video had like 15 times the amount of views. I think that's huge for me to learn that, but there's also literature saying that, so it's not new in the field. But I think this is one of the first pieces of content that actually has video content of fishers from different countries and having this regional approach to local issues. And so I think it would be interesting, because we found that there were these vocabulary differences, very small, but being able to target and tailor the way we spread this communication to specific places, even at the regional level. Like I think there's a connection between the local and the regional that isn't quite there yet. And I think we can kind of make it on the big scale, like what we kind of tried to do here with UNOC as the platform. But I think what we can go use this to move forward from is to do things on the local scale. We know that we need to do things on the local scale, but really trying to tailor the communication in a place based on that.
Do you think that the main, problem is really this local versus, these two different geographical, site rather than a lifestyle? Because what I see from your, slide 20, the stakeholders study, local stakeholders, what I see is that the only one, where the threat pop up is the fisher, okay? It's the only, they are talking about pollution, professional children. It's really, okay, there is a threat. We can hold it with our professional things for our future generation. It's clear. The first affected people by pollution are these people, okay? And for the other, it's, okay, quite positive, I think, or they think that this is a solution, or I don't know, but they don't feel threat at all. I don't know. And it's really crazy for me to see that.
And it's interesting because we asked fishers mostly and other stakeholders the same questions. So we had the interview questions. And so but I do think it also, we asked, what are the challenges you face? And I think the fishers maybe had more to say on those.
Yes,
Yeah.
because they are things, they are the direct community impacted by this. So do you think there is something to do at this level here to make them join, the same, to be on the same, wavelengths, or to help each other to be more aware of the threat also? Because I'm really sad to see that, because it's been years and years and years that communication is done on this and the threat, and seeing that the other stakeholders, did not mention it. So while the fishermen still mention it, for me, it's really, disruptive.
Yeah, and I think it's maybe also a concept of the fact that they are split into two groups, that these people are doing this as a job, the MPA managers or conservationists, to preserve the marine protected area or preserve marine protection, whereas fishers are relying on it for their local livelihood as well. And I think that it would be interesting to, I don't know, the thing is that we tried to create this material to share the voices of fishers with other fishers too, and to target it from this fisher perspective. And so I think, we could develop communication just around how it will support future generations, because I think that would maybe impact the way that fishers see the communication materials too. Is that answering your question?
Yeah, no, it's really broad. So it doesn't make you think about, I think that the difference in lifestyle, I think, should be really taken into account in our communication strategy, maybe rather than, it fits with also a professional context. I don't know. It's
maybe it also has to do that when we design communication campaigns, we need to be really specific about our target audience as well. Like this was really for UNOC, but maybe having a fisher targeted communication campaign, having a public communication campaign, and really having all these materials to go into a place where we want to share this message and know who we want to share it with, I think could be really important as well. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. So a couple of last questions for today.
So I wanted to ask you about the fact that they didn't feel like HPA were improving the socioeconomics. But then you mentioned also that there are some preconceived notions. And I wonder if maybe the material was delivering this message, but their ideas that they had before was too strong. And maybe they were like, okay, they say this in the video to advertise, but we know that it's like not like this. Do you think that that might have influenced the answer?
Yes, definitely. And I also think maybe the long length of time too, the answers to the survey could have had to do more with what they're dealing with at that moment or their experiences. But I think, yeah, it's an interesting piece of data to move forward with as well, because I think we can make these videos all we want, but we're not going to get across the message if people aren't open to hearing it. And so maybe it would be interesting to have one of the survey respondents said, we also asked them ways that we could improve. And some people said like Instagram content or more of this. Some people said expand this material further, like what we found in the study. But also some people said that maybe courses on this subject or face-to-face communication would be really interesting. And I wonder if maybe meeting, just like for me, UNOC was the most powerful, maybe meeting people in person and understanding their perspectives could help to start breaking that barrier of what is preconceived in your mind versus, yeah, what you're hearing from someone else. Yeah, it's interesting.
In the context of targeting, how important do you think the age difference is? You said that the young people perceived it different. Why? Because they're the FFF generation, or what do you have in mind?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think some of the hypotheses I had for that, it was specifically about the community interest, which was kind of what we targeted with this video. One thing that I thought of was maybe related to Sophia's question, that maybe older viewers already have all of this experience. And so they really have this set idea of what an HPA is, if they're already working in it. Or maybe younger viewers are more engaged in video content and they are more able to change their mindset based on what they see. But I think I would love to go further into the analysis of why we see a difference in age as well, because we had kind of age categories and it was like under 45 were more like, under 35 were more likely to say that community interests are well served by highly protected areas. So.
Thank you. I was thinking a bit more in what you mentioned about the retention of the information, and I wonder if you ask, or it would be a nice idea also to ask the people how open they would be to continue receiving information regarding this topic. So not only assessing how this information was retained by them, but then how much they will be open to continue receiving this information. Because in that way you can also see another type of impact of your video and the material that you created. I don't know if that is something you ask, or maybe would be interesting to ask.
Yeah, no, I didn't, and that's really interesting because, yeah, see if the material that we have closed them off and say, I don't want to hear about this anymore. I've heard about it so many times. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that might also be a nice measure of engagement, how much this is likely to change behavior. And that was one of the original survey questions that I wanted to ask, but it didn't really help us find the message that we wanted. So I think that would be an interesting way to phrase it as well, is how the future ideas of how likely are you to want to watch something again. The way I had thought of it was how likely are you to engage in this, and so it didn't really yield any results, but that would be an interesting.
To be kept updated, like the news regarding these things, like if they really want to know more about this.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was super interesting. I was wondering how you or the team came up with the questions for both the fishers and for this survey.
Yeah, so I think so we had specific questions that we asked to all interviewees because we knew that the message of the video we wanted to share was, what is your relationship to the marine environment? What challenges are you facing? And also about solutions, because we wanted to try and frame this. It's actually been proven by literature that when you have positively framed communication materials, it's actually more likely to lead to action in conservation efforts. And so we wanted to have at least the challenges and solutions highlighted in the video, but then for each country, we actually worked with the NGO to develop the questions that they thought would be most relevant to their MPA and to have the fishers and the others answer in their community. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Amy.
Thank you.
This concludes our second day and so sixth session of Immersion project presentation. We have a very exciting last session tomorrow with Gaia, Andrea, Jacob, and Raphael. And I invite all of you to be here tomorrow morning at 8:30 because the first presentation will not be online, but it's open for you as well. And you can have access to the coffee break only if you're here at 8:30. Of course, in the afternoon, we have the year one. It will be time for you to shine on the SCAN projects on Mars. I hope you will still be all together with us for the end of the day for the celebration. Thank you for the jury today, for being here, for all the time you shared with us, and all your questions also. Thank you. Also, a big thank you because tomorrow it's a shorter day. A big thank you to Crystal, who is also running everywhere, doing everything, and Thomas on the back here, making sure also all the coffee break and everything is ready, trying to answer all the emails at the same time. Bonne soirée à tous, enjoy your evening. For those of you, especially who are on holiday, and good luck for those who are not yet.
I love your breath.